fat girl left for dead after losing her legs. Only the most feared mountain man refused to leave her. The snow was falling hard when her own kin turned their backs, left her broken in the dirt, with wolves closing in. Everyone thought she was finished. But out of the timberline came the man they all feared, the reclusive giant who never showed mercy. He carried her to his lonely cabin and did the unthinkable. He saved her. Yet whispers spread fast. Soldiers came riding, accusing him of crimes he did not commit. They said she was his hostage. They said he was a traitor. But the truth was far more dangerous. Because what bound them together was stronger than fear, stronger than shame, and strong enough to shake an entire town. Will she be remembered as the cripple they left to die, or as the miracle that redeemed the most feared man in the West? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late autumn wind whipped through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, carrying the first bitter kiss of winter. Wagon wheels creaked and groaned as the small train of settlers pushed forward through the narrowing pass. Inside the covered wagons, families huddled together for warmth, the sound of children's coughs mixing with the jingling of horse harnesses and the sharp calls of drivers urging their teams onward. Aaliyah sat quietly beside her father on the wagon seat, trying to make herself as small as possible despite her size. The rough wooden bench seemed to shrink with each passing mile, forcing her to press against the wagon's edge to give him more room. Her father's jaw worked silently as he gripped the reins, his weathered face set in familiar lines of disappointment. "You're slowing us down," he muttered, not looking at her. "Should have left you with your aunt in Kansas Territory." The words cut deep, though they weren't new. Aaliyah pulled her thin shawl tighter and watched the gathering storm clouds, dark and heavy with snow. The first flakes began to fall as dusk approached, dancing in the strengthening wind. The lead wagon called for making camp, but before they could circle up, sharp cracks split the air. Gunfire. Aaliyah's heart leaped into her throat as riders emerged from the timber, their whoops and shouts mixing with the panic of horses and the screams of children. "Raiders!" The cry went up as chaos erupted. Horses reared in their traces. Wagons lurched and swayed. Their own team bolted, the reins slipping from her father's grasp as he reached for his rifle. The wagon wheel caught a boulder, and suddenly the world tilted. Aaliyah felt herself thrown sideways, her father's coat brushing past as he leaped clear. The impact drove the breath from her lungs. Sharp pain exploded through her lower body as the wagon's weight came down, pinning her legs beneath the heavy wheel. Through tears of agony, she saw the other wagons fleeing, heard the thunder of hooves and the fading sounds of battle. "Papa!" she cried out, her voice lost in the wind. "Please, please don't leave me." But the wagons grew smaller and smaller, disappearing into the gathering storm. No one looked back. No one returned. The snow fell harder as darkness crept in. Aaliyah's legs had gone numb, though whether from cold or injury she couldn't tell. She tried praying, but the words froze in her throat. The wind carried new sounds now, the haunting howls of wolves, drawing closer with each passing hour. Time blurred. The storm painted everything white, and consciousness came in waves. Sometimes she thought she saw shapes moving in the darkness, but they always dissolved into swirling snow. Her family's faces haunted her. Would they come back? Did they even notice she was gone? A shadow loomed suddenly before her, solid and real. Aaliyah blinked away ice-crusted tears, fear gripping her heart. A tall figure stood studying her, broad-shouldered and still as stone, a rifle slung across his back. The stories came rushing back, tales whispered around campfires of Ryan Cutter, the mountain man who walked the high country alone, more legend than flesh. He knelt beside her, and she saw his face in the dim light, weathered like old leather, lined with years of sun and wind, a scar running along his jaw. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something unexpected. Not the coldness of a killer, but a deep, measured calm. "Your legs," he said, his voice rough as granite. "Bad break. Might be worse." He studied the wagon's position, then the gathering darkness. Wolves are coming down. Storm's driving them to lower ground. Please, Aaliyah whispered, her lips numb with cold. I don't want to die here. Cutter was silent for a long moment, and she saw something flash across his face. Memory, perhaps, or old pain. I've buried enough, he said finally. Not tonight. He shrugged off his heavy cloak, wrapping it around her shoulders with surprisingly gentle hands. Working quickly but carefully, he leveraged the wagon wheel just enough to pull her free. The pain nearly drove her back into darkness, but his strong arms caught her, lifted her against his chest. She felt the warmth of him through the cloak, heard the steady beat of his heart. Hold on, he murmured, turning toward the timber. Cabin's not far. Storm's getting worse. Through the curtain of snow, Aaliyah caught glimpses of the abandoned wagon growing smaller behind them. Her old life, she realized, was disappearing with it. The family that had never truly wanted her. The endless days of trying to be smaller, less burdensome, less herself. Fresh tears froze on her cheeks, but they weren't all from pain. The wind howled through the trees, and wolves answered in the distance. But Cutter's stride never faltered as he carried her deeper into the forest, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Aaliyah found herself clinging to his buckskin shirt, head pressed against his shoulder. As consciousness began to slip away again, the last thing she remembered was his voice, low and certain. Stay with me, girl. Dawn's coming. Then the storm swallowed everything in white, and she knew no more. In those final moments before darkness took her, Aaliyah felt something she hadn't known in years. Not safety exactly, but the presence of someone who saw her, truly saw her, and chose not to turn away. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in that moment it meant everything. The path ahead would be hard. She could feel that truth in her broken body, in the pain that pulsed with each of Cutter's steps. But she was no longer alone in the storm, no longer abandoned to the mercy of wolves in winter. Whatever came next, she would face it with this strange, gentle-handed mountain man who had decided she was worth saving. The last howl of the wolves faded into the distance as Cutter carried her through the deepening snow, away from the wreckage of her old life and toward whatever dawn might bring. The wind howled like a living thing through the darkened trees as Ryan Cutter made his way uphill, each step deliberate against the deepening snow. Aaliyah lay bundled in his arms, her breath coming in shallow gasps against his chest. The storm had turned the forest into a maze of white-shrouded shapes, but his feet knew the path to his cabin even in darkness. Nobody coming back, Aaliyah murmured, her voice thin and distant. Left me there, always leaving. She drifted off again, her head lolling against his shoulder. Ryan tightened his grip, surprised to find himself whispering words he hadn't spoken in years. Lord, if you're listening, he muttered through clenched teeth, help me get her through this night. The prayer felt strange on his tongue, like a language half forgotten. He hadn't called on God since that terrible day when raiders had taken his own family, leaving him alone with nothing but vengeance for company. A wolf's howl echoed through the timber, closer now. Others answered, their voices forming a hungry chorus that made Ryan quicken his pace. The girl in his arms shivered violently, and he could feel the wet warmth of blood seeping through her skirts despite the tourniquet he'd fashioned. Finally, the dark bulk of his cabin emerged from the swirling snow. He shouldered through the door, kicking it shut against the wind. Working one-handed, he struck flint to steel, lighting a pine knot torch that cast jumping shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Ryan laid Aaliyah carefully on his sleeping cot, unwrapping the blood-soaked blankets from her crushed legs. What he saw in the torchlight made his jaw clench. The wagon wheel had done its work thoroughly. Both legs were mangled beyond saving, the bones showing white through torn flesh. Outside, wolves circled closer, their paws crunching in the snow. They could smell the blood. Ryan moved quickly around the cabin, gathering what he needed. His sharpest hunting knife, heated in the rekindled fire until it glowed, strips of clean linen, herbs he'd dried last summer, yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, and a dusty bottle of brandy he'd been saving for who knew what. His hands shook slightly as he laid out the crude tools. He was no doctor, but he'd seen enough battlefield surgery during the war to know what needed doing. Without proper amputation, infection would take her within days. With it, at least she'd have a chance. "Girl," he said roughly, touching her face. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain and fever. "This is gonna hurt something fierce, but it's got to be done if you want to live. You understand?" Aaliyah focused on him with effort. "Do it," she whispered. "Please, just don't leave me alone." Ryan nodded, helping her drink some brandy. "I ain't going nowhere." He positioned the torch for better light and took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Keep your eyes on me now. Just keep looking at me." He began his grim work, trying to block out her cries as he cut through flesh and bone. Between strokes, he whispered encouragement, words he barely remembered saying, "You're stronger than you know. God's got plans for you yet. Stay with me now." Aaliyah thrashed, despite the brandy, her fingers clawing at the rough blankets. Ryan worked as quickly as he dared, using all his wilderness knowledge to stem bleeding and clean the wounds. The torch burned low as he finished, casting an amber glow across Aaliyah's tear-streaked face. She had fallen into a merciful unconsciousness by the time he tied the last bandage. Ryan slumped against the wall, exhausted. Outside, the storm was breaking up, and the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the cabin's single window. He had done what he could. Now it was up to her, and perhaps to that God he'd started talking to again. The morning sun rose fully, making the fresh snow glitter on the mountainsides. Ryan tended the fire and checked Aaliyah's fever, watching her face for any sign of waking. The wolves had gone, leaving only tracks in the snow to show they'd been there. It was mid-morning when Aaliyah finally stirred. Ryan saw the moment awareness returned, saw her eyes widen as she tried to move, and found her body changed forever. Tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks as she lifted the blanket with trembling hands. "Had to be done," Ryan said quietly, meeting her gaze. "Infection would have taken you otherwise." Aaliyah stared at the bandaged stumps where her legs had been, her breath coming in short gasps. The tears fell faster now. But Ryan saw something else in her face too, a desperate search for understanding, for meaning in this new reality. He moved closer, resting his calloused hand next to hers on the cot. "You're alive," he said firmly. "That means God ain't done with you. Might not see his purpose yet, but he's got one. I've lived long enough to know that. Much." Aaliyah turned her face toward him, really looking at him for the first time since the wagon accident. Something shifted in her eyes. Not acceptance exactly, but a spark of possibility. Her fingers moved slightly, touching his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw, "for not leaving me out there. For giving me a chance." Ryan nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude but knowing she needed to say it. "Rest now," he said gruffly. "You've got healing to do." As Aaliyah drifted back to sleep, her breathing steadier now, Ryan found himself watching the sun sparkle on the snow-covered peaks through the window. He hadn't saved anyone in a long time, hadn't wanted to. But something about this girl's courage, her will to live despite everything, had awakened something he'd thought long dead in his own heart. The day stretched ahead, full of challenges they'd have to face. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of that long night, it was enough that they had both survived. One girl who refused to die, and one man who'd remembered how to care whether someone lived. Fever gripped Aaliyah like a burning vice in the days that followed. Time blurred into a hazy stream of half-waking moments and fevered dreams. Through it all, Ryan's presence remained constant, a solid anchor in her storm of delirium. He moved through the cabin with quiet purpose, his heavy boots marking time on the wooden floor. Every few hours, she felt the cool touch of a damp cloth on her forehead and the rim of a tin cup against her lips. The broth he offered was simple, just melted snow flavored with dried meat and herbs, but it kept her alive. "Small sips now," he would murmur, his gruff voice gentler than she'd first heard it. "That's it. Keep fighting." In her lucid moments, Aaliyah watched him through half-closed eyes. His weathered hands, scarred from years in the wilderness, moved with surprising gentleness as he changed her bandages. The wounds where her legs had been throbbed constantly, but Ryan's careful ministrations kept the fever from claiming her completely. Nights were the hardest. As darkness fell, wolves would gather near the cabin, their howls piercing the thin walls. Each cry sent tremors through Aaliyah's weakened body, memories of lying helpless in the snow flooding back. But whenever she opened her eyes, she found Ryan seated beside her bed, his rifle laid across his knees. The firelight caught the silver in his beard and the alert watchfulness in his eyes. "They won't come near," he would say, not looking at her directly, but somehow knowing she was awake. "Not while I'm here." In her fever dreams, voices from the past tormented her. Her father's words cut deeper than any physical pain. "Nothing but a burden. Can't even keep up. Who'd want her?" The memories twisted through her mind like poisonous snakes. "Worthless," she whispered one night, tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "Should have left me." A rough hand touched her shoulder, breaking through the spiral of shame. Ryan stood there, holding something bound in cracked leather. "Here," he said, placing a worn Bible in her hands. "When you've got strength enough, would you read some? My eyes don't see fine print anymore." Aaliyah's fingers traced the familiar shape of the book, feeling its well-worn pages. "You want me to read to you?" Ryan settled back in his chair, adjusting his rifle. "Might help pass the time. Been a while since I heard the good book proper." It was a simple request, but something about it pushed back against the darkness in her mind. Here was something she could do, even now, even like this. During the day, Ryan's work filled the air around the cabin. The steady chunk of his axe splitting wood became a comfort to Aaliyah, marking the passage of time better than any clock. She listened as he hauled water from the stream, his boots crunching in the snow. The ordinary sounds of survival wrapped around her like a blanket, reminding her that life continued, even when everything had changed. Sometimes he would pause in his work, coming inside to check on her or add wood to the fire. He rarely spoke, but his presence carried its own kind of conversation. He moved with the careful efficiency of a man long used to solitude, yet something had shifted in his manner. There was purpose in the way he tended to her needs, a dedication that went beyond mere duty. One evening, as the light faded and the first wolf calls echoed from the ridge, Aaliyah finally voiced the question that had haunted her since that first night. "Why didn't you leave me?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet cabin, it carried clearly. Ryan was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. He stared into the fire, his face carved in shadows. When he finally spoke, his words were simple but heavy with meaning. "Because no one should die alone." The truth of it struck Aaliyah deep in her heart. This man, who everyone feared, who lived apart from all society, had looked at her broken body in the snow and seen not a burden, but a human being worthy of dignity. He had carried her through the storm, saved her life with his rough healing, and kept watch through her darkest hours. All because he believed no soul should face death abandoned and alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were different from the tears of shame and despair she'd shed before. Something new was taking root in the wasteland of her heart. Not quite hope, not yet, but its first tender shoot. Ryan cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion hanging in the air. He stood and moved to add another log to the fire. "Rest now. Tomorrow, we'll see about getting you sitting up proper." Aaliyah clutched the Bible to her chest, feeling its solid reality. "Would you like to hear some verses first?" He paused, then settled back in his chair with a nod. "Reckon I would." Her voice was weak but grew stronger as she read, the familiar, words flowing like clear water. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Outside, the wolves sang their lonely songs to the moon, but inside the cabin, two souls kept company against the night. One reading ancient words of comfort, the other listening in silence, both finding something they'd lost, the simple grace of human connection. Ryan sat with his rifle ready, as he had every night since bringing her here. But his eyes were closed now, his face peaceful as he listened to the words that had once been as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Aaliyah, read until sleep began to blur the letters, knowing that when she woke he would still be there. The fever still came and went, but its hold was weakening. Each day brought more clarity, more moments of true wakefulness. And in those moments, Aaliyah began to understand that while the wagon wheel had taken her legs, it had also delivered her to someone who saw her value beyond her body's ability to walk or work. Someone who had chosen, against all expectation, to be her guardian when the rest of the world had turned away. The Bible's pages whispered beneath her fingers as she marked her place. Tomorrow there would be more verses to read, more small victories in her healing, more quiet moments shared with this unlikely protector. For now, it was enough to know that in this remote cabin, high in the mountains where wolves prowled and snow sparkled, she had found something she'd never truly had before. A place where she was wanted, not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. The mountain winter settled in around the cabin like a thick blanket, bringing both isolation and a strange kind of peace. As Aaliyah's strength slowly returned, Ryan began teaching her ways to be useful from her bed. He'd prop her up with rolled blankets and bring her small tasks that his rough hands found difficult. "These potatoes need peeling," he said one morning, setting a bucket beside her bed. He demonstrated with the prolspoud. First one, his hunting knife moving in quick, practiced strokes. Nothing fancy, just get the skin off. Aaliyah's hands trembled as she took the small knife he offered. The first potato slipped from her grip, rolling onto the floor. She flushed with embarrassment, but Ryan simply picked it up and placed it back in her palm. "Try again," he said, his voice carrying no judgment. "Grip it firmer this time." She did, and though her first attempts were clumsy, leaving more potato than skin on the ground, she gradually found the rhythm of it. By midday, she had a small pile of cleaned potatoes beside her. The achievement might have seemed small to others, but to Aaliyah, it felt like climbing a mountain. Ryan nodded at her work. "Good, we'll make stew tonight." The days began to follow a pattern. While Ryan went hunting in the crisp morning air, Aaliyah would work on whatever task he'd left her. Sometimes it was mending shirts with tears from thorny brush, her needle weaving careful stitches through worn fabric. Other times, she'd string dried herbs into bundles for storage, filling the cabin with the sharp scent of mountain sage and wild mint. When Ryan returned from hunting, often dragging an elk on a crude sledge, he'd work outside skinning and preparing the meat. Aaliyah would listen to the sounds of his labor, marking his progress by the changing rhythms. The scrape of the hiding knife, the thud of meat being cut into portions, the crack of bones being cleaned from marrow. One afternoon she heard him working differently with the hides, the sounds unfamiliar. "What are you making?" she called through the open door. "Something to help you walk again," he answered after a pause. "Crude thing, but better than nothing. Seen Indian warriors use similar after battle wounds. Leather cups, fitted right, can bear weight." Aaliyah fell silent, touched by his thoughtfulness but afraid to hope too much. She turned back to the shirt she was mending, blinking back tears as she pushed the needle through fabric. The scripture readings became the heart of their evenings. As darkness gathered outside and wolves began their nightly chorus, Aaliyah would open the worn Bible. Ryan would settle in his chair, sometimes cleaning his rifle or working with leather, but always listening. She noticed how certain verses seemed to catch him. When she read about mercy, about prodigal sons returning home, about shepherds leaving 99 sheep to find one lost lamb, his hands would go still. Sometimes his eyes would close, as if the words touched something deep within him that he wasn't ready to share. The snow continued to deepen, drifting against the cabin walls until the windows showed only white. Their world shrank to the space between the cabin walls, but somehow it didn't feel confining. Each day brought small victories as Aaliyah grew stronger. Then came the afternoon when she decided to try sitting up without help. Ryan was outside, chopping wood. The steady rhythm of his axe gave her courage. She pushed herself up on her arms, determined to prove she could do this one simple thing. For a moment, she managed it. Her heart soared with triumph. Then her weakened muscles gave way, and she collapsed back onto the bed. The impact sent waves of pain through her healing wounds, but the physical hurt was nothing compared to the wave of despair that crashed over her. Tears came in a flood. All the frustration, all the shame of dependency, all the memories of being called worthless seemed to pour out at once. She didn't hear the cabin door open, didn't notice Ryan's approach until he knelt beside her bed. "I can't do anything," she sobbed, covering her face. "I'm useless, just like they always said. Stop that." Ryan's voice was firm but gentle. He pulled her hands away from her face, forcing her to look at him. "You've got fire enough to shame any man I've met. I've seen you fight fever that would have killed most. Seen you work until your hands shake, never complaining. Stop believing lies others told you." His words cut through her tears, their truth impossible to deny. She saw herself reflected in his steady gaze. Not as a burden, but as someone with worth, with strength he respected. That night, after Ryan had banked the fire and taken his place in the chair near her bed, Aaliyah lay awake listening to the soft fall of snow outside. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow of embers, but she felt wrapped in a peace she hadn't known since childhood. For the first time since the wagon wheel had crushed her legs, since her family had abandoned her to die, she felt moved to pray. Not the desperate pleading of someone facing death, but the quiet communion of a soul finding its way back to faith. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for sending him, for giving me another chance, for showing me I'm not what they said." Ryan's breathing had grown steady in his chair, but she knew he'd wake at the slightest sound of trouble. His presence, like the snow surrounding them, created a space where healing could happen, not just of her body, but of her spirit. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake adding to the thick white blanket that isolated their cabin from the world. But inside, in the quiet darkness, Aaliyah felt more connected than she had in years. Connected to God through prayer, to herself through growing strength, and to this quiet man whose gruff kindness had saved more than just her life. She touched the Bible resting beside her bed, drawing comfort from its familiar shape. Tomorrow would bring more small tasks, more attempts at independence, more verses to read. But for now, she let herself rest in the peace of the moment, knowing she was exactly where she needed to be. The first hints of spring whispered through the high valley. Icicles dripped from the cabin's eaves, and patches of brown earth emerged from beneath the melting snow. Ryan watched through the window as mountain. Bluebirds returned, their wings flashing bright against the pale sky. One crisp morning, he approached Aaliyah's bed with determination in his stride. "Time you felt some sun on your face." Aaliyah's heart leaped, though anxiety flickered across her features. "Outside? But how?" "Same way I brought you in," Ryan said simply, already wrapping her in a warm blanket. His arms were gentle but sure as he lifted her, cradling her against his chest like something precious. The cabin door creaked open, and Aaliyah squinted at the brightness. Fresh mountain air filled her lungs, carrying the sharp scent of pine and melting snow. Ryan carried her carefully across the muddy ground to a broad stump he'd clearly prepared, settling her upon it with the blanket tucked around her legs. "It's so beautiful," she breathed, tilting her face toward the Sunday. After months inside the cabin, the vastness of the sky above made her dizzy. New tears sprang to her eyes, but these were tears of joy. Ryan stood beside her, his usual stoic expression softening as he watched her take in the view. The valley spread below them, patches of snow gleaming between stands of pine. Birds called from the trees, and a warm breeze carried the promise of green things growing. "The Lord makes all things new," Aaliyah quoted softly, remembering their scripture readings. Ryan nodded, but something caught his eye in the distance. His posture stiffened. Far below, barely visible through the trees, riders moved along the valley floor. Their uniforms marked them as United States cavalry, blue coats stark against the landscape. Aaliyah didn't notice his tension, too absorbed in watching a pair of chickadees flip between branches nearby. Ryan kept his voice carefully neutral. Getting chilly. Best get you back inside. That afternoon, while Aaliyah napped, Ryan made his monthly trip to Mason's trading post. The small supply station served trappers and the occasional prospector sitting 3 hours' ride down the Rad to Mountain. Usually, he enjoyed these brief contacts with the outside world, but today something felt wrong. The trading post was unusually crowded. Ryan recognized the army uniforms he'd spotted earlier. He lingered in the shadows near the door, listening as he pretended to examine supplies. Raid was too well planned, one soldier was saying. Had to be an inside man. That mountain devil. Cutter he knows every trail through these parts. Wouldn't put it past him, Mason replied. His usual friendly manner turned cold. Man's gone wild up there alone. Heard tell he's keeping some poor crippled girl hostage now. Survivor from that same raid, if you can believe it. Ryan's hands clenched around the sack of cornmeal he was holding. The accusations struck him like physical blows. After all these years of honest solitude, they thought him capable of such treachery. Of hurting Aaliyah? He completed his purchases quickly, speaking to no one. The ride home seemed longer than usual, his thoughts darker than the gathering storm clouds. He'd lived with suspicion before, but this was different. The army wouldn't let such accusations rest, not with so many dead from the raid. Back at the cabin, Ryan stored the supplies with mechanical movements. Aaliyah noticed his mood but didn't press him. She'd learned to read his silences over their months together. That evening, as always, she opened the Bible. Her clear voice filled the cabin with ancient words of comfort. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Ryan sat in his usual chair, but his rifle lay across his knees instead of the leather work he normally did during readings. His eyes kept straying to the window, where darkness gathered thick among the trees. He knew they would come soldiers, bounty hunters, men seeking justice or glory. They would come with torches and accusations, threatening the peace he and Aaliyah had found. Aaliyah continued reading, unaware of the storm building around them. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Ryan's grip tightened on his rifle. He'd sworn never to raise arms against the army again after the war, but if they threatened Aaliyah, his thoughts tangled with memories of other fights, other losses. The weight of his reputation, earned and unearned, pressed down like a physical burden. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Outside, a wolf howled, a long, lonely sound that echoed off the mountainsides. Ryan recognized it as a warning call. Something was moving in the valley below. His jaw clenched, but he kept his seat, not wanting to alarm Aaliyah. She looked up from the Bible, candlelight playing across her face. In these months of healing, color had returned to her cheeks, strength to her voice. She'd grown past mere survival into something more, a woman of quiet dignity and deep faith. The thought of anyone threatening her peace made his blood run cold. Thou preparest a table before me, in the presence of mine enemies. Ryan closed his eyes, letting the familiar words wash over him. How many times had they read together through the dark winter nights? How many times had her voice carried him past his own demons? Now real enemies gathered, and he felt the weight of protection heavy on his shoulders. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As Aaliyah closed the Bible, Ryan rose to check the cabin's defenses one more time. He added wood to the fire, its light casting long shadows on the log walls. Every window was secured, every approach visible from within. He'd chosen this spot years ago for its defensibility, never thinking he'd one day be protecting someone else here. Something's troubling you, Aaliyah said softly. It wasn't a question. Ryan paused in his preparations, considering how much to share. He wouldn't burden her with accusations, with the danger gathering around them like storm clouds. She'd carried enough fear in her life. Just weather changing, he said finally, settling back in his chair with the rifle across his knees. Spring brings all sorts through the valley. Aaliyah nodded, accepting his answer, though her eyes showed she knew there was more. She reached for the piece of leather she'd been stitching, her hands steady with practiced skill. The quiet sounds of her work filled the cabin, needle through leather, thread pulling tight. Ryan watched the darkness beyond the windows, his thoughts circling like the wolves in the valley below. He'd found unexpected peace in these months of caring for Aaliyah, a purpose he'd thought lost forever. Now that peace was threatened, but he'd face whatever came. He owed her that much and more. The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, carrying hints of the changes to come. Ryan settled deeper into his chair, prepared for a long night's watch. Whatever approached through the darkness, they would face it together. The next morning brought a frosty dawn. Ryan rose before first light, moving with quiet purpose through the cabin. He gathered tools, hammer, nails, and lengths of seasoned pine he'd been saving for repairs. His movements were careful, trying not to wake Aaliyah, but she stirred anyway, propping herself up on her elbows. "What are you doing?" "Just some mending that needs doing," Ryan answered, his voice measured. He carried the supplies outside, where the sound of hammering soon echoed through the trees. Throughout the day, Ryan worked steadily. He reinforced the door frame, added fresh boards to weak spots in the walls, and checked every window shutter. To casual eyes, it might have looked like simple spring maintenance, but Aaliyah watched him from her bed near the window, noting how he tested each repair for strength, how his eyes constantly scanned the tree line. By afternoon, worry had settled deep in her chest. When Ryan came in for water, she caught his sleeve. "Something's wrong. You've been watching the valley like a hawk watches prey." Ryan paused, water dipper halfway to his lips. The silence stretched between them. "Please," Aaliyah said softly. "I've had enough of people hiding truth from me." He set the dipper down with a sigh, shoulders heavy with the weight of words unsaid. "Armies in the valley. They're asking questions about the raid on your wagon train." Aaliyah's hands twisted in her blanket. "What kind of questions?" "They think I had something to do with it." Ryan's voice was flat. "Words spread that I'm keeping you here against your will. A hostage." The color drained from Aaliyah's face. "But that's not true. You saved my life." "Truth ain't always what men want to hear." Ryan moved to the window, checking the valley again, especially when they're hunting someone to blame. Aaliyah's mind raced. All these months of healing, of finding purpose again, and now, her very presence could bring destruction to the man who'd saved her. What will they do? "They'll come. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they'll come." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "When they do, it's best if you're not here. I know a place, a settler family down valley. Good folks. They'll know." Aaliyah's voice was firm, surprising them both. "I won't run and hide while you face this alone." "Aaliyah, I won't." Her eyes blazed with sudden fire. "All my life, people have decided what's best for me, treated me like a burden, left me behind. I won't let you do the same." Ryan studied her face, seeing not the broken woman he'd found in the snow, but someone stronger, someone who'd fought through pain and despair to find her own worth. Pride mingled with fear in his chest. "It could get dangerous." "Then I'll stand beside you." She straightened her spine, chin lifting. "Let them come. Let them see the truth with their own eyes." A hint of a smile touched Ryan's weathered face. "You've got grit, girl. I'll give you that." As evening approached, Ryan finished the last of his fortifications. The cabin was as secure as he could make it without being obvious about it. He'd just started preparing their supper when a soft knock sounded at the door. Ryan's rifle was in his hands instantly. Aaliyah held her breath, watching as he moved silently to the window. After a moment, his shoulders relaxed slightly, though he kept the rifle ready as he opened the door. A tall Apache man stood in the doorway, hands empty and raised slightly to show peaceful intent. His face was young but carried wisdom in its lines, and he wore a mix of traditional and settler clothing. A medicine pouch hung at his belt. "Takoda," Ryan said, lowering his rifle. "Been a long time." "3 winters," the man replied, his voice deep and calm. I saw your smoke. Thought to pay my debt." Ryan stepped aside, allowing Dakota to enter. The Apache's eyes took in everything: the fortified walls, the rifle by the door, Aaliyah in her bed. But his expression remained neutral, revealing nothing. "What debt?" Aaliyah asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Dakota glanced at Ryan, who nodded slightly. "He spared my life," Dakota explained, "when others would not have shown mercy. During the war between tribes and settlers, he found me wounded. Could have collected bounty. Instead, he helped me heal." Ryan shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "Did what any man should have done." "Few did," Dakota replied simply. He reached into his medicine pouch, drawing out a small leather packet. "I bring herbs. For pain." He looked at Aaliyah. "The kind that lives in body and spirit both." Aaliyah's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "The mountains speak. They tell of a woman who lost her legs but found her heart." Dakota moved closer, his movements deliberate and gentle. He knelt beside her bed, studying her with kind eyes. "My people say, true strength is not in what we carry, but in how we carry it." Tears welled in Aaliyah's eyes at his words. All these months, she'd struggled to see herself as anything but broken. But in Dakota's gaze was something different. Respect, recognition of strength she hadn't known she possessed. "A warrior fights from the heart, not the legs," Dakota continued, placing the packet of herbs beside her. "You have a warrior's spirit, mountain woman." The simple dignity in his words washed through Aaliyah like a cleansing rain. She'd been daughter, burden, victim, survivor, but never warrior. The title settled around her shoulders like a mantle, bringing with it a new sense of purpose. Ryan watched the exchange, something easing in his own expression. Dakota's presence was like a cool wind clearing storm clouds. The Apache's quiet strength and wisdom brought balance to their worried thoughts. "Will you stay?" Aaliyah asked impulsively. "Share our evening meal?" Dakota glanced at Ryan, who nodded. "Be glad of the company," Ryan said gruffly, but genuine welcome showed in his eyes. As Ryan added more to the cooking pot, Dakota settled cross-legged near the fire. He began showing Aaliyah how to prepare the herbs he'd brought, explaining each one's purpose in his deep, steady voice. The cabin filled with the sweet smell of medicine plants and cooking food, and for a moment, the threats gathering in the valley seemed distant. Aaliyah's fingers moved carefully over the herbs, as Dakota taught her their names and uses. His presence had brought something vital to their small sanctuary, not just alliance in troubled times, but recognition of the dignity in her new life. Whatever came next, she would face it not as a victim to be protected, but as a warrior in her own right. Dakota studied the pine branches Ryan had gathered, running weathered fingers along their grain. "This one," he said, selecting a sturdy limb. "It speaks of strength." Ryan nodded, taking up his knife. "Wood?" Shavings curled away as he began shaping the first crutch. Dakota guided his hands, showing him how to create the perfect curve for under the arm, how to notch the wood so it would hold firm. The Apache's knowledge of woodcraft merged with Ryan's own skills, turning raw timber into something useful. Aaliyah watched from her bed, hope and fear wrestling in her chest. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, catching dust motes in its beams. She traced the scars on her legs, remembering the weight they once carried. Now, she would have to learn a new way of moving through the world. "The wood must be strong," Dakota explained, "but gentle against the skin." He showed Ryan how to smooth the surfaces until they gleamed. "Like a good horse, it carries weight, but does not bite." Days passed as they worked. Ryan carved patiently, testing each piece, starting over when the wood split wrong. His usual gruff manner softened into quiet concentration. Sometimes he would pause, looking at Aaliyah as if measuring the crutches against her determination. Finally, one crisp morning, the crutches stood ready. Ryan had wrapped their tops in soft deerskin to prevent chafing. Aaliyah's heart thundered as she looked at them, simple tools that held such power over her future. "Are you ready?" Ryan asked, his voice gentler than usual. Aaliyah nodded, though her hands trembled. I reckon it's time. Ryan and Dakota positioned themselves on either side of her bed. With careful movements, they helped her sit up, then swing what remained of her legs over the edge. The floor seemed impossibly far away. Remember, Dakota said softly, the earth welcomes all who walk upon it. It does not judge how they come. Ryan handed her the crutches, showing her how to position them under her arms. Lean forward a bit, he instructed. Let them take your weight. Aaliyah gripped the smooth wood, feeling it press against her sides. With a deep breath, she pushed up. For one glorious moment, she was standing, supported between the two men and her new wooden legs. Then her arms began shaking. The crutches slipped. She pitched forward with a cry of alarm. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. Ryan and Dakota lifted her easily. No judgment in their faces, only patient support. Again, Aaliyah whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Please. They helped her reset, and again she tried. This time, she managed 3 wobbling steps before collapsing. Each attempt ended the same, with failure and gentle hands helping her up. By midday, she was bruised and exhausted, but a seed of accomplishment had taken root in her heart. She had stood. She had moved. Enough for today, Ryan said, helping her back to bed. You done good. Tomorrow, she replied firmly, though every muscle ached. We try again tomorrow. And so began a new routine. Each morning, Aaliyah would practice with the crutches. Ryan and Dakota stayed close, catching her when she fell, offering quiet encouragement. Some days, she could only manage a few steps. Other days, her arms gave out immediately. But she kept trying, like a young deer. Dakota observed one morning, watching her struggle. It falls many times before running free. Aaliyah paused, sweat beading on her forehead. Did you just call me a deer? The Apache's eyes crinkled with amusement. A strong deer, one that does not quit. Ryan snorted from where he was mending a bridle. Stubborn as a mule's more like it. Their gentle teasing lifted her spirits. Each day brought small improvements. She learned to swing her body between the crutches, to balance her weight just so. The bruises faded and her arms grew stronger. But life beyond the cabin continued its course. Ryan would return from supply runs with tight lines around his mouth, though he never spoke of what he heard. One evening, Aaliyah overheard him talking with Dakota outside. Town's full of poison talk, Ryan muttered, calling her the fat cripple I'm keeping prisoner, saying I'm some kind of beast. Words are wind, Dakota replied calmly. They cannot harm what is true. Ain't the words I'm worried about. It's what they might lead men to do. Aaliyah's heart ached, knowing she was the cause of such trouble, but she channeled that pain into determination. Each step she took was an answer to those whispers, proof of life and courage they could never understand. Spring opened fully across the mountains, painting the slopes in wildflower colors. Dakota began encouraging her to practice outside, where the ground was uneven but the air was fresh with possibility. The sun gives strength, he explained, helping her navigate the cabin's threshold. And the wind carries away doubt. Those first steps outside were terrifying. The ground shifted beneath her crutches, and the open space made her feel exposed. But the warmth of the sun on her face was worth every moment of fear. One pristine morning, with birds singing in the pines, Aaliyah set herself a goal, to cross the entire yard. Ryan watched from the chopping block, trying to seem occupied with his work, but never taking his eyes off her progress. Step by step, she made her way across the rough ground. Her arms trembled with effort, and sweat ran down her back. Halfway across, her crutch caught on a root, nearly sending her sprawling. But she caught herself, readjusted, and kept going. When she reached the far side of the yard, triumph exploded in her chest. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the mountains. Her legs might be gone, but she could move. She could live. She could find her own way across any distance. Looking back, she caught Ryan trying to hide a smile behind his beard. Their eyes met across the yard, and something passed between them. Pride, understanding, a shared victory over despair. "Well done, mountain woman," Dakota said quietly, having appeared silent as smoke beside her. "Your spirit grows stronger than any crutch." Aaliyah looked down at her wooden supports, seeing them now not as symbols of loss, but as tools of freedom. "I never thought I'd feel proud again," she admitted. "After everything, I thought that part of me was gone too." "Pride grows best in hard ground," Dakota replied, "like the flowers that bloom in rock cracks." She nodded, understanding at last. Every step, every fall, every bruise had been necessary. They had taught her that strength comes in many forms, and dignity can be found in the simple act of refusing to quit. Ryan approached, carrying a water dipper. "Reckon you earned this," he said gruffly, but his eyes were bright with something that looked remarkably like joy. Aaliyah drank deeply, tasting victory in every drop. Around her, the mountain morning sparkled with promise. She had taken her first steps into a new life, one she would build on her own terms, supported by these two unlikely guardians and her own newfound courage. Autumn painted the high country in bold strokes of gold and crimson. The aspens shimmered like coins in the cooling breeze, and mornings brought frost that crunched beneath Ryan's boots as he did his chores. Inside the cabin, Aaliyah had grown strong and capable, managing most daily tasks with determined grace. Her crutches had become extensions of herself, clicking steadily across the wooden floor as she cooked, cleaned, and kept their home. That Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp. Ryan stood before his clouded mirror, fighting with an old string tie he had found in a trunk. His fingers, more accustomed to rope and rifle, fumbled with the unfamiliar knot. "Here, let me help," Aaliyah offered from her chair by the hearth. She had already dressed in her best dress, one they had altered together during the long summer evenings. The fabric stretched comfortably across her full figure, and she had pinned her hair up with careful attention. Ryan grunted but moved closer, letting her fix the tie. Her fingers worked quickly, and soon the black string lay neat against his cleaned shirt. "There," she said softly. "Now you look proper enough for church." "Ain't been proper in 20 years, Ryan muttered, but there was no bite in his words. He helped Aaliyah to her feet, steadying her as she positioned her crutches. "You certain about this?" Aaliyah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly on the crutch handles. "It's time. We can't hide up here forever, and—" She paused, gathering courage. "I want to thank God properly, in his house, for sending you that night." Ryan's weather-worn face softened. He nodded once, sharp and quick, then helped her out to where their wagon waited. He had spent days adjusting the seat, adding padding and handles so she could mount it safely. Still, he lifted her himself, gentle as always, before securing her crutches alongside. The journey down the mountain took over an hour. Ryan drove carefully, avoiding the worst ruts that might jostle his passenger. Aaliyah sat straight and proud, though her fingers gripped the seat's edge tightly as they approached town. Several times she caught Ryan glancing at her, checking her resolve. "I'm ready," she assured him as the white-painted church came into view. Its simple steeple rose against the autumn sky, and the bell was already tolling its Sunday morning call. Ryan pulled the wagon to a stop beside the church steps. Other wagons and horses crowded the hitching posts, and well-dressed families climbed the stairs, their boots clicking on the wooden boards. Several people paused, staring as Ryan helped Aaliyah down from the wagon. She positioned her crutches carefully, taking a deep breath. The stairs loomed before her like a mountain. "Together," she whispered. "Together," Ryan confirmed, staying close as she began her slow ascent. Each step required careful positioning, balance, and strength. Aaliyah had practiced on the cabin's 3 steps until her arms ached, but these were steeper, more numerous, sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air. Behind her, she heard whispers start. "Is that the mountain man's woman?" They said she lost her legs. Ryan's presence at her back kept her moving forward. Finally, they reached the church door, where the preacher stood waiting. His eyes widened at their approach, but then his face broke into a genuine smile. "Welcome," he said warmly. "Welcome to God's house." Inside, the church hummed with quiet conversation. Sunlight streamed through simple glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews. As Aaliyah appeared in the doorway, a hush fell over the congregation. She felt every eye upon her as she began her slow journey down the center aisle. Click, swing, click, swing. Her crutches marked a steady rhythm on the wooden floor. Ryan walked beside her, matching her pace. His usual intimidating presence turned protective. Some people drew back as they passed. Others leaned forward in fascination. They settled into a pew near the back, where Ryan had space to help Aaliyah sit and store her crutches. She smoothed her skirt with trembling hands, feeling simultaneously exposed and strangely peaceful. This was God's house, after all. Surely there was room here for everyone, even a woman with no legs, and the fierce mountain man who had saved her. The service began with familiar hymns. Aaliyah sang softly at first, then with growing confidence as the music filled the small church. Ryan stood silent beside her, but his presence felt like an anchor in strange waters. When the preacher rose to deliver his sermon, he paused, his eyes finding Aaliyah in the congregation. Something in his planned words seemed to shift as he studied her face. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we speak often of faith moving mountains. But sometimes," he smiled directly at Aaliyah, "sometimes faith moves legs that ought not walk. Sometimes it carries us through valleys of shadow on wings we never knew we had. Sometimes it sends angels in unexpected forms to lift us when we fall." A murmur rippled through the church. Several heads turned toward Ryan, seeing perhaps for the first time not the feared mountain man, but someone capable of profound mercy. "This morning," the preacher continued, "we are blessed to witness such faith in our midst, a reminder that God's work shows itself in many ways, through many hands." The congregation shifted, and then someone began to clap. The sound spread, growing from hesitant pats to warm, genuine applause. Aaliyah felt tears spill down her cheeks as she smiled, overwhelmed by this acceptance she had never expected to find. Beside her, Ryan sat straight-backed, his usual scowl softened by something that might have been pride. After the service, instead of the usual quick departure to avoid townsfolk, they found themselves surrounded. Women pressed forward with covered dishes and invitations to social gatherings. Children darted around Ryan's legs, no longer afraid of his towering presence. "We've been baking extra," one woman said, pressing a wrapped casserole into Aaliyah's hands, "for healing and welcome." "My Tommy's got questions about mountain life," another added, as her young son tugged at Ryan's sleeve. "If you wouldn't mind sharing tales sometime." Ryan looked stunned, his usual defensive posture softening in the face of such friendly advances. He answered questions with gruff kindness, his hand never far from Aaliyah's shoulder. The journey home took longer, their wagon laden with gifts of food and friendship. The mountain air grew crisp as evening approached, painting the sky in deep purples and golds. Ryan had built up the hearth's foundation over the summer, making it safer and stronger than before. Now, as darkness fell, its warm light spilled out to welcome them home. Inside, Aaliyah settled into her chair while Ryan stoked the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the cabin smelled of fresh-baked bread and autumn's promise. She watched him move about their shared space, this man who had changed her life so completely. "Ryan," she said softly. He turned, firelight catching the silver in his beard. "Maybe God's not done with either of us." Her voice carried all the hope and gratitude of their shared journey. Ryan stood still for a long moment, the flames reflecting in his eyes. When he nodded, she saw tears glistening in the firelight. No words were needed. Their hearts understood the miracle they had found in each other's salvation. The autumn night settled cold and clear over the mountains. Inside the cabin, Aaliyah sat contentedly by the hearth, still wrapped in the warmth of their morning's welcome at church. She watched Ryan methodically cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with practiced care over the weapon. "You're humming," he noted, a hint of amusement in his gravelly voice. Aaliyah hadn't realized she was. The hymns from church still echoed in her heart. "I reckon I am," she smiled. "It feels like everything's changing, doesn't it? Like spring coming after winter." Ryan's hands stilled on the rifle. He opened his mouth to respond, but another sound cut through the peaceful evening. Horses approaching, many of them at speed. The cabin's door burst open before either could move. Torchlight flooded the room as soldiers pushed inside, rifles raised. Their captain, a hard-faced man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "Ryan Cutter," he announced, voice sharp with authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy with raiders and holding this woman against her will." "No," Aaliyah cried out, struggling to rise from her chair. "That's not true. He saved my life." Two soldiers seized Ryan's arms. He didn't resist, but his eyes found Aaliyah's, silently willing her to be still. The captain ignored her protests, reading from a wrinkled paper. "Multiple witnesses place you near the wagon train before the attack. You were seen signaling to raiders." The captain's lip curled. "Then you conveniently rescued this woman, keeping her isolated for months." "That's lies." Aaliyah's voice shook with fury. She grabbed her crutches, trying to stand. "He found me after my own family abandoned me. He saved me when no one else would." A young soldier snickered. "Saved you? Look at you now. No legs, dependent on him. Some salvation." Ryan's muscles tensed at the cruel words, but he remained still as they shackled his wrists. His quiet dignity made the soldier's roughness seem even more brutal. "The woman's obviously been corrupted by him," the captain declared. "Probably Stockholm Syndrome. We'll send someone for her later." He jerked his head toward the door. "Take him." "Wait." Aaliyah struggled forward on her crutches. "You can't do this. Please, let me explain." But the soldiers were already dragging Ryan outside. One knocked her crutches aside as he passed, sending her sprawling. She hit the floor hard, crying out in pain and frustration. Through the open door, she saw more soldiers surrounding the cabin with torches. The captain's voice rang out. "Burn it. This place has sheltered a traitor long enough." "No." Aaliyah crawled toward the door, her arms trembling with effort. The first flames were already licking up the cabin's outer walls. Smoke began to curl through the cracks between logs. A soldier glanced back at her struggling form and paused. For a moment, she thought he might help. Instead, he grabbed her crutches from the floor and tossed them out into the snow. "Better hurry," he sneered. "If you want those." Aaliyah forced herself forward, ignoring the splinters that dug into her palms. The smoke grew thicker. Outside, she could see Ryan being led away, soldiers shoving him roughly between them. He walked straight and proud, but his eyes sought her one last time through the growing haze. The heat drove her out into the snow. She pulled herself through the drifts, gasping as the cold soaked through her clothes. Her crutches lay, just out of reach, half buried in white powder. Behind her, flames roared higher, consuming the place that had become her sanctuary. The soldiers' torches receded down the mountain trail, taking Ryan with them. Soon even their voices faded, leaving only the crack and roar of the fire. Aaliyah's arms gave out. She collapsed into the snow, watching helplessly as everything they had built together burned. The flames painted the night sky orange, sending sparks spiraling up like fallen stars. Smoke stung her eyes, but the tears that fell were from a deeper pain. Once again, she lay abandoned in the snow. Once again, everything had been taken from her. "Not again, Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't leave me alone again." The fire's heat couldn't reach her through the cold that settled into her bones. She watched as the roof beams crashed inward, sending up a fountain of embers. The Bible Ryan had asked her to read lay somewhere in those flames. The chair where she had first found strength to sit up alone. The table where they had shared meals and quiet conversations. All of it burned, erasing the physical proof of their months together. But they couldn't burn away the truth she knew. Ryan's gentleness as he had tended her wounds, his patience as she learned to walk again, the quiet respect in his eyes when she succeeded. No matter what lies they believed about him, she knew the real man. The cold crept deeper. Aaliyah's wet clothes began to freeze, but she couldn't reach her crutches. Her arms shook too badly now to pull herself any further. The snow around her melted from the fire's heat, then refroze, trapping her in place. She thought of that first terrible night, when Ryan had found her pinned beneath the wagon wheel. He had refused to let her die alone in the snow. Now she lay helpless again, watching him being marched away in chains, while their home turned to ash behind her. The flames began to die down, leaving only glowing embers where the Flaun's cabin had stood. Stars emerged through the smoke, cold and distant. Aaliyah's teeth chattered as she whispered broken prayers into the darkness. Even now, after everything, she couldn't believe God would abandon her twice to the same fate. She had survived once. She had learned to walk again, to live again, to trust again. But as the bitter wind whipped around her and the last warmth of the fire faded, Aaliyah felt her strength failing. Without Ryan, without shelter, without even her crutches within reach, how could she possibly survive another night alone in the snow? "Please," she whispered, her voice growing faint, "please don't let it end like this." The wind howled through the trees, drowning out her words. Where the cabin had stood, a few timbers still smoldered, sending thin streams of smoke into the night sky. Aaliyah lay in the snow, shivering, watching the last traces of their life together fade into darkness. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pale gold. Dakota moved silently through the trees, tracking the soldiers' trail from the night before. He had seen their torches from afar, but arrived too late to intervene. Now, as the first light touched the smoldering ruins of Ryan's cabin, his keen eyes caught sight of something dark against the white snow. His heart clenched when he recognized Aaliyah's still form. Frost had formed on her clothes and hair, and her lips had turned an alarming shade of blue. But when he knelt beside her, he felt the faint warmth of breath against his palm. "Sister," he said softly, using the Apache term of respect. "Hold on." Working quickly, Dakota gathered dry branches from beneath the snow-laden pines. He built a temporary shelter, a lean-to facing away from the bitter wind. From his medicine pouch, he took dried herbs and bark, starting a small fire with practiced hands. The flames caught quickly, and soon a thin curl of smoke rose into the dawn sky. Gently, he lifted Aaliyah's frozen form closer to the fire's warmth. Her eyelids fluttered, and a weak moan escaped her lips. Dakota wrapped her in his own blanket, then retrieved her crutches from where they lay half buried in the snow. "The soldiers," Aaliyah whispered, her voice barely audible. "They took Ryan." "I know." Dakota's voice was grave. "But first, you must live." He melted snow in his copper pot, adding dried meat and herbs to make a simple broth. When it was warm, he helped Aaliyah sit up enough to sip the steaming liquid. Color slowly returned to her cheeks, though she still shivered violently. "We cannot stay here," Dakota said, studying the sky. More snow clouds were gathering. "The town is closest. Can you endure the journey?" Aaliyah nodded weakly. "I have to, for Ryan's sake." Dakota disappeared briefly into the woods, returning with several straight pine boughs. With quick, skilled movements, he lashed them together with strips of rawhide, creating a crude but sturdy sled. He layered it with pine boughs for padding, then carefully helped Aaliyah onto it. The journey down the mountain was slow and treacherous. Dakota pulled the sled with careful strength, choosing the gentlest paths through the timber. Still, every bump and dip sent waves of pain through Aaliyah's cold, stiffened body. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood. The sun was high when they finally reached the outskirts of town. People stopped to stare as Dakota pulled the sled down the main street, some pointing and whispering behind their hands. A few children ran ahead, spreading the news. Outside the church, several women had gathered after hearing the commotion. Among them was Martha Preston, the preacher's wife, who had smiled so warmly at Aaliyah just yesterday. Now her face paled at the sight of Aaliyah's condition. "Lord, have mercy," Martha breathed, hurrying forward. "What happened?" Dakota explained briefly about the soldiers and the burning cabin. Martha's expression hardened with each word. "Bring her inside," she commanded, taking charge. "Sarah, run fetch Dr. Williams. Mary, we'll need extra blankets and hot water." The women worked together to carry Aaliyah into the church's small side room, usually used for Sunday school. They laid her on a cot and began removing her frozen clothes, replacing them with warm, dry ones. Martha's gentle hands shook with anger as she saw the bruises from Aaliyah's fall. "Those soldiers," she muttered. "To leave a woman to freeze, and her in this condition, it's not Christian." By nightfall, fever had set in. Aaliyah tossed restlessly on the cot, her skin burning hot to the touch. Dr. Williams came and went, leaving medicine and instructions, but his face was grave. The exposure was severe. He told Martha, "Keep her warm and pray." Through the long night, the women of the church took turns sitting with Aaliyah. They spooned broth between her cracked lips and bathed her forehead with cool cloths. In her delirium, she called out for Ryan, her words sometimes clear, sometimes jumbled. "Please," she would whisper, "he's innocent. He saved me. Don't let them hurt him." Meanwhile, Dakota moved through the town like a shadow, listening and speaking quietly to those who would hear. He told the true story of how Ryan had found Aaliyah abandoned and dying, how he had sacrificed his solitude to care for her, how he had taught her to live again. In the saloon, men argued over their whiskey about Ryan's guilt or innocence. Some still called him a savage and a traitor, but others remembered how he had helped their families through hard winters, asking nothing in return. "Always seemed more hermit than outlaw to me," old Jake Thompson mused, scratching his beard. "And that girl yesterday in church, she walked in on her own power, proud as you please. Don't seem like no prisoner to me." The townswomen, touched by Aaliyah's plight, began bringing food and supplies to the church. They sat with her during her fever dreams, listening as she spoke of Ryan's gentleness, his patience, his quiet faith. Gradually, their fear of the mysterious mountain man began to fade, replaced by understanding. 3 days passed. Aaliyah's fever raged, then broke, leaving her weak but clear-headed. She opened her eyes to find Martha Preston dozing in a chair beside her bed, a Bible open in her lap. Sunlight streamed through the window, making patterns on the wooden floor. "Water?" Aaliyah whispered. Martha startled awake, then smiled warmly. "Welcome back, dear. We've been powerful worried about you." As she helped Aaliyah drink, Martha told her how the town had rallied around her. Even those who were scared of Ryan before are starting to see things different now. Dakota's been telling folks the truth, and your own words during the fever, well, they touched many hearts. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. "But Ryan, do you know where they took him?" Martha's face grew serious. "Fort Carson, we think. The military justice there is harsh, especially with all this raid business lately. But don't you worry yourself sick again. God hasn't brought you this far to abandon either of you now." Aaliyah closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. She had lost her family, her legs, and now her home. But something new had grown in its place, a community willing to look past fear and prejudice, to see the truth with open hearts. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Martha or to God. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." Outside the church window, snow began to fall again, soft and gentle. But this time, Aaliyah wasn't afraid. She was surrounded by warmth, by caring hands, by prayers lifted up in faith. Somewhere in a cold cell, Ryan waited for justice. She would not let him wait alone. Martha squeezed her hand, understanding in her eyes. "Rest now, child. Gather your strength. God's not finished with this story yet." The guardhouse at Fort Carson loomed dark against the morning sky, its rough-hewn logs weathered by countless mountain storms. Inside, Ryan Cutter sat on a narrow wooden bench, his broad shoulders hunched against the cold. Iron shackles bound his wrists, chafing against old scars. Through the small window, he could see soldiers drilling in the yard, their boots raising dust in the weak winter sunlight. Captain James Morton paced before him, boots clicking against the plank floor. The officer's uniform was crisp, his brass buttons gleaming, but his eyes held a hard edge that spoke of too many battles, too many betrayals. "You understand the gravity of these charges, Cutter?" Morton's voice cut through the silence. "Collaboration with hostiles, inciting raids against settlers, The evidence suggests you've been feeding information to the tribes. Ryan kept his gaze fixed on the floor, saying nothing. His silence seemed to fill the small room, heavy as mountain stone. 3 wagons lost in the past month alone. Morton continued, his voice rising. Good families murdered. And every time, the raiders seemed to know exactly where to strike. Curious, isn't it? Especially with you living up there in those hills, watching everything that moves through the pass. Still, Ryan remained silent. In his mind, he saw Dakota's face, the quiet dignity, the debt of honor between them. One word from Ryan could condemn his friend, but that word would never pass his lips. Lieutenant Parker, a younger officer with eager eyes, stepped forward. We know about your Apache friend, Cutter, the one who visits your cabin. Talk now, and maybe we can show leniency. Ryan lifted his head slowly, meeting Parker's gaze. The mountain man's eyes were clear and steady, holding neither fear nor anger. Reckon you boys already made up your minds about me, he said quietly. Nothing I say will change that. Morton slammed his hand against the wall, making the lantern rattle. Damn your stubbornness, man. People are dying out there. People? Been dying since the first wagon crossed these mountains, Ryan replied evenly. Ain't always clear who's to blame. The captain's face darkened. Your trial starts tomorrow. Without your cooperation, I can't guarantee the outcome will be pleasant. Ryan nodded slightly, as if this was exactly what he had expected. Much obliged for the warning. The officers stormed out, leaving Ryan alone in the growing darkness. He closed his eyes, not in despair but in quiet prayer, something he had learned from Aaliyah during those long winter nights. Her faith had awakened something in him he had thought long dead. Miles away, in the town's small church, Aaliyah gripped her crutches with determination. Martha Preston hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she faltered. You need more rest, Martha urged, watching as Aaliyah struggled to balance. The fever barely broke 3 days ago. The trial is tomorrow, Aaliyah replied, her voice firm despite her weakness. I have to be strong enough to testify. She took another step, sweat beading on her forehead. The wooden crutches creaked under her weight, but she refused to stop. Each movement was a battle against exhaustion and pain, but she fought on, driven by a purpose greater than herself. They'll twist your words, Sarah Miller warned from where she sat, mending by the window. Army trials ain't known for mercy, especially not toward mountain men who keep company with Indians. Aaliyah paused, catching her breath. Then they need to hear the truth even more. Ryan saved my life when my own kin left me to die. He showed me mercy when others showed only scorn. Martha crossed to the window, watching snow begin to fall. It's a good 5 miles to the fort, child. The road's rough, and in your condition. Then I'll start walking now, Aaliyah said, taking another determined step. God will give me strength. The women exchanged worried glances, but they recognized the steel in Aaliyah's voice. It was the same strength that had helped her survive the loss of her legs, the same courage that had lifted her from despair. Dr. Williams arrived later that afternoon, summoned by the concerned women. He examined Aaliyah carefully, his weathered face creased with worry. The journey could kill you, he said bluntly. You're still weak from the exposure, and your body hasn't fully healed from the original trauma. Aaliyah met his gaze steadily. And if I don't go, they could hang an innocent man. The doctor sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. At least let us arrange a wagon. Benjamin Cooper owes me a favor. His team could have you there in 2 hours. But Aaliyah shook her head. I need to walk in on my own power. The court needs to see that I'm not a victim being controlled by Ryan. They need to see my strength. As evening approached, Aaliyah knelt beside her bed, her crutches laid carefully beside her. Her prayers were intense, almost desperate in their fervor. Lord, she whispered, you gave me strength when I thought all was lost. You sent Ryan to save me when others abandoned me. Now he needs your strength. Please, help me stand tomorrow. Help me speak truth to power. The church women gathered around her, adding their own prayers to hers. Their voices rose and fell like gentle waves, filling the small room with hope and determination. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in a soft white blanket. In the distance, Fort Carson's lights glowed dimly through the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring judgment, but tonight was for preparation and prayer. Martha brought Aaliyah a bowl of hot soup and a thick shawl. "If you're determined to do this," she said softly, "then we'll help you. Sarah's already packed bandages and liniment for your shoulders. Mary's bringing her warmest cloak." Tears filled Aaliyah's eyes. "I never thought I'd find such friendship here when my family left me." "You have a new family now," Martha interrupted gently. "One that sees your true worth." As night deepened, Aaliyah lay awake, listening to the wind in the eaves. She thought of Ryan in his cold cell, facing his accusers with quiet dignity. She remembered his patience as he taught her to use her crutches, his gentleness when changing her bandages, his quiet strength that had given her courage to live again. "I won't fail you," she whispered into the darkness, "just as you never failed me." Tomorrow would test her body and spirit to their limits, but Aaliyah felt a deep peace beneath her determination. God had not brought her this far to abandon her now. Whether by strength or grace, she would walk into that courtroom and speak truth to power. In his cell, Ryan too lay awake, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the guardhouse wall. He thought of Aaliyah's courage, her unwavering faith, her determination to find purpose in her pain. Whatever tomorrow brought, he knew he had done right by her. That knowledge gave him peace, even in chains. The night grew deeper, wrapping both prisoner and witness in its quiet embrace. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, they rested in the strength of their convictions and the power of unspoken prayers. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of anxious spectators. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across weathered floorboards. Lieutenant Parker stood at attention beside Captain Morton, their brass buttons gleaming in the pale sunlight. Ryan sat quietly at the defendant's table, his hands still bound. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but his eyes constantly scanned the room, noting every exit, every face. Years in the mountains had taught him to always be aware of his surroundings. Captain Morton stepped forward, his voice filling the makeshift courtroom. "We present evidence that Ryan Cutter has been complicit in raids against settler wagons. Multiple witnesses place him near attack sites. His isolation in the high country makes him the perfect spy for hostile forces." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ryan remained still, his expression unchanged. A woman in the back row clutched her shawl tighter, whispering to her neighbor about the savage mountain man. "Furthermore," Morton continued, producing a worn leather journal, "we found maps in his cabin marking wagon train routes. Why would an innocent man track settler movements so carefully?" Ryan's eyes flickered briefly to the journal. He had used those maps to guide lost travelers, to find stranded families. But explaining would mean revealing Dakota's involvement in those rescues. His silence was the price of his friend's safety. Lieutenant Parker called their first witness, a merchant who claimed to have seen Ryan conferring with suspicious Indians near Simpson's Creek. The testimony felt rehearsed, hollow. Yet the crowd shifted uneasily, years of frontier fears coloring their judgment. Just as Morton prepared to call another witness, the hall's heavy doors swung open. Dakota stood in the entrance, tall and dignified in his buckskins. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several soldiers reached for their weapons. "I come in peace," Dakota said clearly, raising his empty hands. "To speak truth." Morton's face darkened. "This is a military tribunal. We don't need—" "You seek justice," Dakota interrupted calmly. "Justice requires truth from all sides." The preacher, Reverend Matthews, stood from his place near the front. "Let him speak. God's truth knows no boundaries." Dakota moved forward with measured steps, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. He stopped before the judge's table, meeting each man's eyes in turn. 3 winters ago, I led a war party against Ryan Cutter," he began, his voice carrying to every corner. "We had heard he was killing our people. We were wrong. When we attacked, He had the right to shoot us all. Instead, he showed mercy. He bound our wounds, shared his food, taught us that not all white men carry hatred in their hearts. The room fell silent. Even Morton seemed caught off guard by this unexpected testimony. Since then, Dakota continued, I have watched him help both my people and yours. When blizzards trap travelers, he guides them to safety. When children are lost, he finds them. The maps you hold mark safe passages, not raiding routes. Ryan's shoulders tensed slightly. Dakota was risking much by revealing these things. The Apache scout turned to face the crowd directly. You fear what you do not understand. You see a man who lives apart and think him an enemy. I see a man who bridges two worlds, who chooses mercy over hatred. Before Morton could respond, another commotion arose at the door. All heads turned as Aaliyah appeared, supported by her crutches. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes blazed with purpose. Each step echoed in the hushed room as she made her slow way forward. Martha Preston and Sarah Miller hovered anxiously near the entrance, their faces tight with worry. They had tried to convince her to take the wagon, but Aaliyah had insisted on walking. Now, every eye watched her determined progress. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The journey had taken hours, each step a battle against weakness and pain. But she kept moving, the steady thump of her crutches marking her advance toward the front of the hall. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear despite her exhaustion. I must speak. Morton stepped forward. Miss, this is a military matter. Your presence is not— I was there, Aaliyah cut in, her voice stronger now. The night you claim Ryan Cutter aided raiders against the Watson wagon train. I was there. A murmur ran through the crowd. Ryan's hands tightened on the table edge, his first visible reaction of the day. My family was in that train, Aaliyah continued. When raiders attacked, our wagon overturned. My legs were crushed beneath the wheels. Her voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. My own kin left me. There. They fled, leaving me to die in the snow. She took another step forward, her crutches solid beneath her arms. But Ryan Cutter found me. This man you call dangerous. This man you claim has no mercy. He carried me through a blizzard to save my life. He tended my wounds. He taught me to live again when others had left me for dead. The silence in the room was absolute now. Even Morton seemed unable to find words. Look at me, Aaliyah said, her voice ringing with quiet authority. I stand before you on legs of wood, but I stand. I live because this man refused to abandon a stranger in need. He gave me back my life, my dignity, my faith. Reverend Matthews rose again, moving to stand beside her. I can testify to the truth of her words. I've watched this woman's journey from despair to dignity. Ryan Cutter didn't just save her body, he helped restore her soul. The preacher turned to face the military tribunal. Gentlemen, I've served this community for 15 years. I've buried good people killed by raiders. If I thought for one moment that Ryan Cutter was responsible for such deaths, I would say so. Instead, I see a man who demonstrates the very mercy and compassion that we claim to represent. Aaliyah swayed slightly, her strength finally failing. The preacher caught her arm, supporting her gently, but her eyes remained fixed on the tribunal, burning with conviction. You speak of justice, she said softly. Then look with clear eyes. See the truth before you. This man is no killer. He is a light in these dark mountains, showing mercy where others show hatred, offering help where others turn away. The room erupted in whispers. Townsfolk leaned together, discussing this new perspective on the feared mountain man. Several women wiped tears from their eyes, moved by Aaliyah's testimony. Captain Morton shifted uncomfortably, his certainty visibly shaken. Lieutenant Parker looked thoughtful, studying the faces of Dakota and Aaliyah with new understanding. The judge, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. We have heard accusations born of fear and suspicion. But we have also heard testimony born of direct experience and gratitude. The evidence against Ryan Cutter is circumstantial. The evidence for his character is before us in flesh and blood. He gestured to where Aaliyah stood, supported by the preacher, her face pale but determined. This woman lives because of his mercy. The Apache scout speaks of his honor. These are not the actions of a man who betrays travelers to raiders. The judge's gavel cracked against the wooden table. I find insufficient evidence to hold Ryan Cutter. Case dismissed. The room erupted in a mix of reactions: relief, surprise, lingering doubt. But Aaliyah's eyes were fixed only on Ryan as soldiers removed his shackles. Their gazes met across the room, sharing a moment of quiet understanding that needed no words. She had refused to abandon him, just as he had refused to abandon her. In that moment, surrounded by the murmuring crowd, they were no longer the mountain man and the crippled girl, but two souls bound by mercy, trust, and unshakable faith. The morning after the trial, soldiers packed their gear with tight faces and rigid movements. Their boots kicked up dust as they marched out of town, their proud formation masking their shame. Captain Morton avoided meeting any townsperson's eyes as he led his men away. Their accusations proved false. As the last soldier disappeared around the bend, the town seemed to exhale. Sarah Miller was the first to speak, her hands planted firmly on her hips. "Well then, we've got work to do, haven't we?" Within hours, the town transformed into a hive of activity. Women gathered in kitchens, flour dusting their aprons as they rolled pie crusts and mixed bread dough. The scent of apple and berry pies wafted through open windows, carrying promises of comfort and welcome. "Never thought I'd be baking for Ryan Cutter." Martha Preston chuckled, crimping a perfect crust edge. "Lord works in mysterious ways." Outside the general store, John Cooper loaded his wagon with lumber, nails spilling from overstuffed sacks. Men gathered around, discussing plans and materials needed to rebuild Ryan's cabin. Even Tom Wilson, who'd once crossed the street to avoid Ryan, now offered his team of horses to haul supplies. "Reckon we owe him?" Tom said quietly. "Man's been watching over this valley all these years, we just didn't see it." Children darted between the adults, eager to help. They formed a line from the store to the wagons, passing tools and smaller items hand to hand. Little Mary Davis clutched a hammer nearly as big as her arm, her face serious with responsibility. The caravan of wagons creaked up the mountain trail, loaded with supplies and willing hands. They found Ryan and Aaliyah at the burnt remains of the cabin, already clearing charred timbers. Ryan straightened as the wagons approached, his expression guarded but softening as he recognized friendly faces. "You folks didn't have to come," he said gruffly. Reverend Matthews stepped forward, rolling up his sleeves. "No, we didn't have to. We wanted to. That's what neighbors do." The work began in earnest. Men measured and cut timber, while women set up a cooking area, feeding the growing crowd. Children gathered smaller debris, competing to see who could fill their baskets fastest. Aaliyah sat on a stump, directing traffic and keeping spirits high. Her crutches lay beside her as she sorted nails and tools, her capable hands never idle. Every so often, she caught Ryan watching her, his eyes full of wonder at the transformation around them. The new cabin took shape quickly under many hands. They built it larger than before, with sturdy walls and extra windows to let in light. The doorway was made wide and level, with a gentle slope leading up to it. Ryan noticed these thoughtful additions, but said nothing, though his throat worked suspiciously. Sarah Miller supervised the hearth construction herself. "A proper home needs a proper hearth," she declared, making sure the stones were set just so, for warmth and welcome both. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Martha Preston unveiled the pies she'd kept warm in Dutch ovens. The aroma drew everyone to the makeshift outdoor kitchen, where tables groaned under platters of food brought by the townswomen. Ryan stood apart, overwhelmed by the scene. Aaliyah made her way to his side, her crutches sure on the packed earth. "Quite a change from yesterday," she said softly. He nodded, words seemingly stuck in his throat. Then, to Aaliyah's amazement, he bowed his head. "Lord," he said, his voice rough but clear. "Thank you. Been a long time since I—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Thank you for mercy I didn't earn." Aaliyah's heart swelled with quiet pride. She'd watched this man save her life, teach her to live again, face false accusations with dignity. Now she watched him find his way back to faith, surrounded by the community he'd protected for so long. The new cabin stood solid against the mountain backdrop, its fresh-cut timber gleaming in the evening light. The wide doorway welcomed all who might need shelter. Inside, the hearth waited to warm winter nights and lonely travelers. It was more than a rebuilding. It was a restoration of belonging, of community, of faith. As the sun set, the townspeople gathered their tools and children, heading home with satisfied smiles and promises to return tomorrow. They left behind a transformed homestead and a transformed man, both rebuilt by the power of mercy freely given. Winter settled over the mountains like a thick blanket, turning the world white and hushed. Inside Ryan's rebuilt cabin, golden lamplight spilled across smooth wooden floors and freshly plastered walls. The hearth crackled with welcome warmth, casting dancing shadows against the new timber beams overhead. Aaliyah sat in her cushioned chair near the fire, the worn family Bible open on her lap. Her crutches rested within easy reach against the wall, polished smooth from daily use. The flames caught the silver threads in her dark hair as she read aloud, her voice strong and clear in the peaceful evening. Ryan occupied his usual spot by the window, rough hands moving steadily as he whittled a piece of pine. Wood shavings curled at his feet, and his weathered face softened in the lamplight as he listened to the familiar words. The mountain man who had once struck fear in settlers' hearts now looked at peace, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes gentle. Dakota sat cross-legged near the hearth, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Steam rose in lazy spirals as he sipped, nodding occasionally at the scripture's wisdom. The Apache scouts' presence completed their unlikely circle, a testament to bridges built and prejudices overcome. Outside, snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, coating the world in pristine white. But inside, warmth and companionship filled every corner of the room. The wide doorway that had been built for Aaliyah's crutches now stood as a symbol of welcome to any traveler seeking shelter. Aaliyah's voice grew quiet as she finished the passage. She traced the Bible's leather binding with careful fingers before setting it aside on the table. Her eyes reflected the firelight as she looked at her companions, her new family. "I thought losing my legs ended me," she said softly, her words carrying clear in the hushed room. "But God used it to begin me." Her hand smoothed her skirts over the empty space where her legs had been, no longer with shame but with acceptance. Ryan paused in his whittling, the knife still in his calloused hands. "And used you to redeem me," he replied, his gruff voice gentle with truth. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They shared a long silence then, comfortable and deep. The fire popped and crackled, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, wind whispered through pine boughs laden with snow. But inside their sanctuary, peace reigned complete. These three outcasts, the abandoned daughter, the feared mountain man, and the lone Apache scout, had been forged into something new. Like the cabin rising from ashes, they had been transformed. Where once stood broken souls, now sat pillars of hope and dignity, their shared strength a testament to faith's power to heal and restore. The fire burned steady and bright as night deepened around their mountain home, its warmth a promise of shelter for any other lost souls who might find their way to this place of grace. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines, it's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.